Russia and France have historically been sworn enemies of Britain, so the fact that the British entered the war against Germany was truly an unexpected turn of events. Germany's main opponents were primarily France and later Russia, as they signed an official alliance in 1891. Britain and Germany had the same enemies. So what if Britain united with Germany to fight against their historical rivals, France and Russia? How would this change World War I and history as a whole? Would there have been a second world war? I will answer all these questions in this video. First, we should understand why Germany and Britain did not unite in the first place. As already mentioned, they had common enemies, but also conflicting interests, which ultimately made them ideal allies. How did events unfold? Joseph Chamberlain advocated for an Anglo-German alliance, and he was the father of Neville Chamberlain, which may explain Neville's leniency towards German nationalists. His father aimed for the unification of these two nations. In 1898, there was an official attempt by the British to create a defensive alliance, possibly including the United States. However, Germany rejected this proposal. Bismarck sought an alliance with the British and approached its conclusion several times. But Wilhelm II removed Bismarck from power in 1901, considering his conservative views outdated and restrictive. Up to this moment, Bismarck and Wilhelm II had held numerous negotiations about the possibility of an Anglo-German alliance that could have happened if Bismarck had not been dismissed. In an interview with the Daily Telegraph, Wilhelm II essentially called the British short-sighted for doubting his peaceful intentions, adding that the German people, in general, were not friendly towards the English. Another mistake made by Germany, specifically Wilhelm II, was sending volunteers to the Transvaal, which was fighting in the Second Anglo-Boer War against Great Britain. Wilhelm II wanted the Transvaal to win and establish a protectorate over South Africa, but his plans were thwarted. By that time, hopes for an alliance between Germany and Great Britain had virtually vanished due to Wilhelm II's actions. The British had offered this alliance many times, and all Germany had to do was agree. However, Wilhelm II did not trust the British, despite being the grandson of Queen Victoria. Subsequently, Wilhelm II and George V, his cousin, found themselves on opposite sides of the barricades in World War I. The final straw that buried the Anglo-German alliance was the naval arms race, during which Germany built the most powerful army in Europe and sought to create the largest fleet to outpace Britain. This forced the British to ally with France, leading to the formation of the Entente. As a result, Britain and Russia finally ended their mutual hatred and signed the Anglo-Russian Convention in 1907 in response to a new threat from Germany. Great Britain rapidly dominated the world, and to prevent the emergence of competitors, British foreign policy at the time was hostile towards countries that could threaten its supremacy. Considering the actions of Kaiser Wilhelm II, Germany became such an adversary. Studying the relations between the two countries, one can conclude that it was Wilhelm II who was the problem, as no alliance could exist during his reign. He did not want to unite with Britain, as it would make an alliance with Russia impossible. Germany still hoped to bring Russia back to its side, as both countries were allies in the League of the Three Emperors. But that alliance had already failed twice. Perhaps the Germans thought they would succeed a third time. Considering these issues, how can history be changed to form an Anglo-German alliance? In my opinion, the best way would be to involve Frederick III. Allow me to explain. Frederick II received not only military but also classical education, studying French and English languages, as well as history, geography, and religion, which contributed to his liberal views. He married Princess Victoria, daughter of Queen Victoria, and began to embrace British liberal values. The problem was that Friedrich III ruled Germany for only 99 days, being an avid smoker, and died of cancer without having an impact on his country. In a famous incident, Wilhelm II insulted his liberal father for his views on Jews and Britons, calling him a puppet. After this, Wilhelm II came to power, and I have already described the problems this caused and why the Anglo-German alliance became impossible. I am not suggesting that Friedrich III somehow survived cancer and ruled Germany. I have another proposal that I believe is even better. I suggest that Friedrich II carry out reforms in Germany, using the little time he has. Perhaps William I will die a little earlier, and Frederick II will live a little longer. The goal is for him to rule Germany for at least a year, not just 99 days, which seems quite realistic. Frederick III wanted to limit the power of the Chancellor, appoint liberal ministers, and introduce elements of the British Parliament in Germany. What if he had enough time to do this before being succeeded by Wilhelm II? The French historian Varon Muller famously said that if Friedrich had trained longer, there would have been no Anglo-German rivalry, no Russo-French alliance, and therefore no World War I. So what if this really happened, and Friedrich III could reform Germany, transforming it into a constitutional monarchy politically resembling the United Kingdom, where Germany would have a parliament and be more democratic? Historically, Wilhelm II went against Otto von Bismarck's plans, focusing on France, which led the Germans to open new fronts and acquire new enemies. This did not work for them during World War I. As I have mentioned, Otto von Bismarck was dismissed from office in 1890, and this could have changed the course of events. I asked my audience for their opinion on Wilhelm II, and the results speak for themselves. The comments note that he destroyed everything built by Wilhelm I and Bismarck. Thus, Wilhelm II's opposition to Bismarck made him very unpopular in my community, and looking back, we realize it was a bad idea. Bismarck sought to isolate France and weaken it over time to prevent an alliance between France and other great powers. Perhaps Bismarck would never have been removed if Friedrich III's reforms had succeeded. Ultimately, Bismarck was the most popular figure in Germany, initially more popular than Wilhelm II. Therefore, the parliament could support Bismarck, allowing him to remain in power and control foreign policy as before. After all, we are talking about a man who actually unified Germany and won wars against Austria and France, so no one questioned Bismarck's genius, except for Wilhelm II. Moreover, Friedrich III was also very popular and remembered fondly after his death. He was a military genius and an honest man, so most Germans had a positive opinion of him. Wilhelm II, opposing the legacy of Frederick II and the popularity of Bismarck, would face great difficulties that would limit his capabilities. The parliament would also further restrain him, leading to several changes. The alliance between England and Germany would be almost guaranteed, as Germany only needed to accept one of the many proposals made by Britain. Britain's influence over its colonies was weakening, as demonstrated during the Second Boer War, and some countries sought to ally with Germany to prevent Germany from seizing their colonies, which Wilhelm II aimed to do. As I have already mentioned, both countries could dominate the world, as at that time they were perhaps the two strongest powers. One had the largest and most powerful navy, while the other had the largest and strongest army. If they formed an official alliance, they would become unstoppable. This would mean the absence of an arms race, which would be very important, as both Germany and Britain would have fewer ships but would still sail the seas together. The entertainment of ship battles is truly captivating. My favorite activity is to get closer to the enemy ship and bombard it with torpedoes, which guarantees me a kill. In this clip, I did it twice against a battleship. However, this is far from the only way to play this game, as it features various classes of ships: destroyers, cruisers, battleships, submarines, and even aircraft carriers, each with its unique advantages and mechanics. The ships are based on real historical models. For example, I used the ship Yes, which has an interesting history. It was involved in the Baltic Sea in 1919 and contributed to the liberation of Estonia. This ship also participated in the Normandy landings. Therefore, it's worth trying this game to learn about all these wonderful ships and, importantly, to play as them. I recommend checking out the game as it is truly captivating. Now let's continue. The German and British spheres of influence intersected only in a few areas, yet this alliance could have been more stable than those of other allies. Germany would lose allies in the following years. For example, the alliance of Germany and Austria-Hungary was quite strange. Germany was interested in uniting German-speaking countries, which could include Austria and Bohemia, creating a conflict of interests. Additionally, Austria-Hungary had claims on southern Germany, which it used to dominate for centuries. Thus, the alliance between these countries appeared somewhat illogical. Italy and Austria-Hungary also had conflicting interests, as Austria sought to reclaim lands it once controlled, while Italy wanted those territories where most Italians lived or which had strategic significance. This also led to Italy leaving the Central Powers. I want to say that Britain and Germany had fewer conflicts of interest, mainly related to Tanganyika, and there were no significant contradictions on the European continent. That is why I suggest that this alliance could be sufficiently stable, and both countries could achieve their goals at the expense of their rivals, which would be beneficial for Britain and Germany. I assume this could have happened around 1890 or a little later, although the exact year is not so important. If it had happened, history would have changed drastically, as the balance of power would have completely shifted. In 1890, France and Russia were not yet allies, as they formally signed an alliance in 1894, but had already signed several friendship agreements 3 years earlier, in 1891. Bismarck's strategy was to isolate France and prevent it from forming alliances with other great powers, which were essentially either Russia or the Ottoman Empire. At that moment, Germany could have established an alliance with the other great powers, creating a quadruple alliance and becoming the dominant force in Europe. An alliance between France and Russia would have been prevented. As Germany, if this were to happen, it could threaten the beginning of a war, and the Allies would gladly support such a development. The besieged could benefit from this. Let's return to the words of Francis Warren Mueller. He was right, as the German alliance formed with France, and Russia found itself isolated. But will the Great War happen? I want you to know that the subsequent events described in this video are not entirely realistic, as the story would be drastically altered due to this dramatic shift in the balance of power. Essentially, the most powerful countries in the world would become allies, which would undoubtedly change the course of history, making any predictions impossible. I won't try to be precise, but I will do my best to entertain you. This means that the story would be radically changed, and any forecast for the future would be unattainable. Nevertheless, I want to follow the historical path, as it serves as a guide. Despite the fact that Great Britain was an ally of Germany in 1888, something important happened. The Fashoda incident, when France and Great Britain nearly entered open conflict. I have already made a video on this topic, considering what would happen if these two countries actually went to war, and it was published about a year and a half ago, so I won't repeat myself. I believe that Great Britain would quickly win this border conflict, as it happened in history, thus preventing war between the two countries. Perhaps France would not have been seen as a threat, and the British public might even have sympathized with the French, considering them brothers in the South, isolated and oppressed. Nevertheless, overall, Britain would be closely tied to Germany, and in 1988, the war would have been prevented, while France and Russia would hardly have signed any official alliances. However, I believe that France and Russia would come to an understanding. If one of the countries were attacked by the Quadruple Alliance, the other would have to intervene. Otherwise, both countries would be under pressure, and their only option would be to fight the Central Powers. Thus, I expect that France and Russia will pursue a more aggressive foreign policy and desperately try to establish ties with other countries to counter the dominance of the Quadruple Alliance. The Russo-Japanese War of 1904 will happen, and you probably understand that Russia will undoubtedly win this conflict against the yielding Japanese. However, in reality, Russia will be humiliated by Japan. In this war, there is one key moment that could lead to the beginning of the Great War. Montenegro was also involved in the conflict, supporting Russia. The fact is that Montenegro and Japan never signed a peace treaty, so the conflict between these two countries still persisted. In fact, the incident at Dogger Bank in 1904 could have sparked the beginning of the Great War, as in this alternative history, tensions in Europe would have increased even further. The incident at Dogger Bank occurred against the backdrop of the war between Russia and Japan, when Russia urgently needed ships in the Pacific Ocean. To this end, Russia gathered its forces in Europe and sent them to the Pacific. But upon approaching Britain, the ships mistakenly took British fishing vessels for Japanese submarines and opened fire, resulting in the death of 2 fishermen and injuries to 6 others. Historically, Great Britain did not escalate this conflict much as it sought to establish an alliance with Russia to counter a more serious threat from Germany. This alliance effort was solidified by the signing of the Anglo-Russian Convention in 1907. 3 years after the incident, relations between the two countries were at their peak, as they were on the verge of signing an alliance. However, at this time, Britain was already an ally of Germany, creating tension with France and Russia, their historical rivals. In this context, Britain could choose the path of escalating the conflict. I see this story being widely covered in British newspapers, raising the spirits of the people and intensifying hatred towards the Russians. At the same time, Russia continued to fight Japan, suffering defeats on the front, and was in a terrible situation, exacerbated by the incompetence of Nicholas II. Russia not only fought a war with Japan, but also faced internal problems, which ultimately led to the Russian Revolution of 1905, initiated by Leon Trotsky. This revolution was aimed against Nicholas II and the rest of the nobility, who were considered incompetent and disconnected from the problems of ordinary people. Revolutionaries sought to overthrow Nicholas II and establish a republic that would likely become communist. Historically, Nicholas II was forced to comply with the demands of the protesters, and the Russian Duma was created. But this happened only when the revolution began to spiral out of control. It was reported that Nicholas II was more concerned about his son's illness and preferred to play dominoes rather than deal with revolutionary issues. In an alternative history, the Russian Revolution in 1905 could have looked completely different. Firstly, Great Britain would escalate the Dogger incident and demand unreasonably high compensations from Russia further worsening Russia's economic situation and humiliating it right after its defeat by the Japanese.